We had some of the doctors on TV last night on Hannity. These guys are amazing. I mean, stories of people putting their own finger inside a wound to stop the bleeding for some people so that they can survive and they're not going to need their legs amputated. Amazing stories of heroism, incredible courage. Under the most difficult conditions. Joining us now to talk about this and more, Bill O'Reilly is with us. And Bill, of course, wrote his latest #1 New York Times bestselling book. It's called Killing England. And Mr. O'Reilly, sir, how are you? We're glad to have you back. And I want to say this, as I look at the New York Times bestseller list and I see you at #1 and Hillary #2, well, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't anything but ecstatic and happy that you beat her.
Yeah, I don't think she's real thrilled about it up in Chappaqua. And it wouldn't have happened if not for your highlighting the book and on TV and radio. So I appreciate that. And I think people now are starting to turn inward to their country, as you just pointed out. We're a noble nation. And I think that people are having enough of the America bashing. And even though this massacre in Vegas reflects poorly on the country overseas, the heroism that all of us are witnessing is almost overwhelming. So people want to know how we developed our country, who was in charge, Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, who they were as people. So they're responding to the book very, very well. And it ties in, even though it's a book about the Revolutionary War, it ties in what's happening today. And I wanted to make one more point. People who don't follow television industry, they don't know this, but it just struck me how dominant your program on television is this week. And the America bashing networks, and they'd never admit it, they just wouldn't, but they are. You know, they're bashing Trump, okay, but it's, you know, Black Lives Matter is good, the NFL dissenters are good, all of that, on and on and on. Nobody's watching them. Nobody's watching them. And this is a breaking news story. This is hard news, not analysis. So why are MSNBC and CNN not getting the audience? And it's because I believe that people don't trust them. They don't trust them to tell the truth.
Bill, how could they trust them? They colluded with Hillary Clinton. This to me was one of the great underreported stories. And that was, we had evidence through WikiLeaks of collusion with just about every major news network, cable network, and major newspaper in this country. And then, of course, we've gone how many months now? It's almost a year of Russia. And so often they've been proven wrong. And you never hear, oops, we're sorry. Here's the correction. We'll put it on A1 above the fold. That's never going to happen. And I just
never going to happen.
I think journalism's dead.
More profound
I really do.
Than that. Yeah. It's more profound than that, Hannity. Look, you and me and most people listening to your radio program right now are very interested in politics and what happens on a daily basis in Washington and around the country. Okay. But the majority of Americans are not. They're dancing with the stars, they're watching the game, they're playing on their machines, they're chasing the kids around the house. This story in Vegas, this engages everybody. Everybody. You don't have to be a news watcher to tune in to find out what is happening. So why aren't they tuning in to CNN and MSNBC? They don't know how ridiculously slanted they are. You know, they heard it, but it's not an experience. But I think that people are wising up, that they're not, it's overkill. The left has gone way too far. And most Americans say, you know what? We're not going to get the real story there, so we'll go to Hannity and the other programs on Fox, or we'll go someplace else. We're not going over there.
You know, when you think back when we started the Fox News Channel and we were there from day one together, nobody thought we would succeed. I mean, we were actually laughed at. The first review of Hannity and Combs was, Alan Combs looks funereal and Sean Hannity has a bad haircut and shouldn't be on television. A buddy of yours, Vern Gay, wrote that. I don't know what he wrote about you at the time. And what I'm seeing, and this does really dovetail into your book, because you took a very interesting approach in Killing England in that it's the major events and battles and conflicts during the Revolutionary War told from the perspective of Washington and Franklin and some others. You never painted them as these heroes that were infallible or perfect people, because none of them were. And we're living in a time, Bill, where institutions are under fire. You know, look at the whole Black Lives Matter movement movement. Look at Colin Kaepernick is supporting a murdering thug dictator Castro. He's wearing socks that depict police officers as pigs, and he begins this movement of kneeling. Then it gets picked up in the entire NFL during our national anthem, but they'll stand in England for God Save the Queen. And then we have the battle over monuments and memorials, and let's rip them all down and let's erase America's history. Let's forget that there are heroes when evil does come amongst us. And it just seems like there's a large part of the country that wants to rip these institutions apart.
I'm not sure if the word large is accurate. I think there's a hardcore 25% who believe America is a bad country, white supremacist. That's what they're getting at, that Washington and Jefferson and Franklin were white supremacists. So the Constitution that they fought to impose should be thrown out the window because they're white supremacists. That's the whole end game here. But America back then is a lot like America now. It was divided. 50% of Americans, when the Revolutionary War started, didn't want to separate from the king. They wanted to stay with England. And families broke up because of it. Benjamin Franklin put his own son, William Franklin, the governor of New Jersey, in prison. And there was never a détente between the two. So now we have a division, but I put the number now at 25%. But why it feels bigger is because the media is behind and sympathetic to the far left. So
the media is 100%.
This garbage. Yeah, they glorify it. I mean, can you imagine this idiot Marcus Peters on Monday Night Football after the massacre and after all the heroism that you pointed out, still doesn't stand up in Kansas City for the anthem? What is wrong with you, all right? You hate cops? Is that it, Marcus? What is it? If I were the general manager of that team, Marcus would have been suspended just for offending Americans on the day of that massacre. And, I think, guys like you and me, we're making our stand. And we talked about this on television. We're making our stand now. If you think it's a bad country, we're going to challenge you. If you do untoward, dishonest things, if you pay people to lie about other people, we're going to expose you. And that's what happened in the Revolution. Washington, Jefferson, these guys stepped up, put their own lives at risk every single day because they believed in something. And I'm trying to mobilize Americans to learn about that and do the same thing themselves.
We can save the country. Stay right there. You said something in the last interview we had together that I think dovetails perfectly into where you're going. You've got people like Michael Moore and Brett Stevens. They want to abolish the Second Amendment, and I'll get your reaction to that. Well, more with Bill O'Reilly. His book now, #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. It's called Killing England. We've got a link to it up on Hannity.com. All right, as we continue, Sean Hannity Show, we're in Vegas, final day here today. We're going to be going right over to the hospital immediately following this program and meeting some of the people that have been injured here, which is extremely humbling. When I met this man last night, been married 32 years. He was at the concert with his wife, holding her hand, and she died in his arms. I nearly lost it. It's probably the hardest interview, one of the hardest interviews I've ever done. Bill O'Reilly is with us. His book is now #1 on the New York Times list. We're talking about this hardcore left. You put the number at about 25% of Americans. I would argue that might be an accurate number, but the media is certainly 100% hard left or 98% hard left. I argue journalism is dead in America. And then you have a bunch of people that just aren't really informed and are susceptible to bumper stickers and slogans and the playbook that the left plays every election season. But last time you were on, you talked about how ultimately the left, the hard left, would want to get rid of our Constitution. Now, Larry O'Connor wrote a column about how Michael Moore is calling for the repeal of the Second Amendment. Brett Stevens, who's now with the New York Times, he's supposed to be their lone conservative voice, and he's not a conservative. Once worked for the Wall Street Journal. He's saying the same thing. If they get to that document, Bill, it's over.
It's not going to happen. You need 3/4 of the states to ratify an amendment being removed from the Constitution, and that won't happen at all. I mean, most Americans, according to all the polls, they want the ability to defend themselves. They don't believe the government should have the power to seize anything. And I don't think that's going to change. Because if you're a smart American, you know that self-reliance is the key to freedom. And that if you live in Montana or Wyoming or one of these states where there's not a lot of police presence because it's so vast, you need weaponry to protect your property and yourself. And even in places like Chicago, where most of the gun violence is taking place, the laws there are extremely stringent against guns. They don't work. So the facts say that any kind of mass movement like Michael Moore would want isn't going to happen. What should happen is that there are things that the authorities, both state and federal, can do to protect public safety better. And two of them are these. Number one, and we found this out on BillO'Reilly.com, it was almost stunning. And if you are buying a mass amount of weapons legally, like this assassin did in Vegas, that is transmitted to the FBI into a big database. But it's not flagged. There's nobody looking at it. So it's there, but who's looking at it? So this guy's got 50 high-powered weapons bought in a year, and the FBI doesn't know it. That's insane. Surely they have the technology. If something's out of the ordinary, that they are pinged. Hey, look at this in Nevada. Maybe we should send a couple of agents out to talk to this guy. Why he's got 50 high-powered weapons. What's the reason? He's not arrested, you don't confiscate, but you, just as they're doing with Islamic terrorism, you surveil. You
investigate.
Look, okay? So that's number one. We could do that. The FBI has to do that.
Number two, we don't have time for number two, and I'll tell you what. If you want to stay through the break, I'll hold you over. We'll take a break. We'll come back. I hate cutting people off, but we do have the constraints of time. 800-941-SEAN. Final moments with Bill O'Reilly coming up. Then we're going to get to your calls. 800-941-SEAN.
Driving the liberals nuts. Sean Hannity is back on the radio right now.
Look at this. I mean, you look at the weapon obtaining, the different amounts of tannerite available. Do you think this was all accomplished on his own? Self-value, face value. You got to make the assumption that he had to have some help at some point. And we want to ensure that that's the answer. Maybe he's a super guy. Maybe he's a super yahoo that was working out all this on his own. But it'd be hard for me to believe that.
And to that, do we need to ask the...
And here's the reason why. Put one and one together, two and two together. Another residence in Reno with several firearms, okay? Electronics and everything else associated with large amounts of ammo. A place in Mesquite. We know that he had a girlfriend. Do you think this is all self-facing? The individuals are just, without talking to somebody, it was sequestered amongst themselves. I mean, come on, folks.
All right, that's the Clark County Sheriff, Joseph Lombardo, saying that he assumes the shooter had some help in some way, matter, or form. We're still waiting for information about something about the background of this guy. The girlfriend thinks he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I have my own suspicions on that matter. And over time, I think the American people will discover that there's something, some motivation, some reason that somebody did this beyond just he snapped. There was way too much premeditation in the case. One interesting thing that was said, I mentioned last night that I talked to Tony Berditis. Tony Berditis was married 32 years to his wife, Denise. He's an Army veteran. And I asked him what he thought about all this discussion about the Second Amendment. And he said he would never relinquish his Second Amendment rights. His wife died in his arms. They were holding hands at a concert. She got shot in the back of the head, died instantaneously there. Just the saddest thing, so unnecessary. And for those of you that doubt evil exists, what happened here in Vegas was evil. There's a lot of darkness in the world. There's a lot of evil in the world. Bill O'Reilly continues with us as #1 best-selling book on the New York Times, Killing England. And Bill, I didn't want to cut you off. Why don't you go back, give us?
No, it's very, very nice of you. I'll make this point quick because I know you got a lot to do. We discovered on BillO'Reilly.com, or we were told, okay, that at Yankee Stadium, where you and I have been many, many times, every game they have snipers above the stadium. Snipers, NYPD snipers. I was shocked. And the security expert who told us that was a former FBI agent, and he said that's what's going to have to happen in mass gatherings, that the SWAT teams on the local police are going to have to deploy snipers around the concerts, around the games, just so they can react instantly if there's a terror incident. So that's what I wanted to tell you. That's the second thing that we learned. And I think it makes damn good sense.
I also think, Bill, I would add to this. In schools, we've had a lot of shootings in schools and so-called gun-free zones. I would love every school in the country to have a ex-military, retired police officer in the school. If somebody goes in there, you got a fighting chance that they can save the lives of these kids. And that idea is met with fierce resistance. And I frankly have never understood it. We have one school shooting after another. The other thing is, all these people on the left, what these hypocrites are like. If you may have been to the Oscars or one of these big red carpet events. I've never been to one in my life, but you can see all the security that is there. All of them have their own armed security guards. They live in what we would describe as fortresses because they're so important and they can afford it because they're all multi-millionaires. The average person, they're lucky if they can afford the $600 Glock that they're going to buy to protect their family on their own property. So all of these people that we keep hearing from that politicize this, their first reaction was to politicize this. They seem to have an awful lot of good security for themselves, and it seems like it's the hardworking men and women in this country that work hard, play by the rules, pay their taxes, and obey the laws, while they're left to fend for themselves.
That's what makes the Chicago situation such a scandal. That these are poor people getting terrorized by these gangs, these armed gangs, and having their children have to witness these murders every single day on the streets in these poor neighborhoods. They have no protection. And this is the best example that anybody could ever have when you hear someone say, oh, the government will protect you. So you don't have a right to arm yourself because the government will provide security for you. Just go to the south side of Chicago and look. This has been going on for 7 years.
18,000 shootings, Bill.
People with protection? No.
Bill, in the course of Obama's presidency, 3,900 people died in his adopted home state. 18,000 shootings in the last 6 years of Obama's presidency in Chicago. And, we should have deployed the National Guard for crying out loud. And I don't think Obama mentioned Chicago more than 3 times in his presidency.
Nope. Didn't make a big deal out of it, and everybody should know that the stock thing that turned semi-automatics into automatics was okayed during the Obama administration. Yep.
All right, Bill, we really appreciate you staying over. His book, #1 on the New York Times list, it's called Killing England. It's on Hannity.com. Bill O'Reilly, thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure, and congratulations on the success.
Thanks, Sean. We'll see you soon.